Thanks for choosing Morning Live. Now, after two consecutive negative growth quarters in 2019, South Africa has entered a technical recession. Statistics South Africa released GDP figures which showed that the economy contracted 1.4% in the last quarter of 2019, and that after the third quarter registered a decline of 0.8%. Now, a negative growth scenario will likely continue to negatively impact efforts at job creation and job retention. Moody's, which is the only credit ratings agency to keep South Africa at investment grade, is also likely to downgrade the country later this month. So to help us make some sense of all of this, I'm joined now by economist and analyst Professor Dilip Garach, who is a chartered accountant and CEO of Garach Corporation Financial Services Group. Thanks so much for your time.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So it would seem as though the picture that emerged yesterday is gloomier than was actually expected.
Well, we certainly thought that things will start to improve, and certainly we thought that the budget will have many positives. And I think we need to just chat about that, because certainly the budget didn't have too many positives in my view, and that has created a problem for us. So certainly these economic figures, which really is the second half of last year, which meant that there was a decline in the economic activity in our country, and that has caused a technical recession, and that's certainly not good for us.
So it's a technical recession. What's the difference between a technical recession and just a recession?
Well, certainly a technical recession means that temporarily the country has gone into a negative, a decline in the economic activity. Perhaps that will change, and we're expecting it to change because there are many positive factors in South Africa. Let's be real, there are certainly many positive things that are happening in our country. But certainly for the time being, things are looking very gloomy.
So the load shedding scenario has been blamed in great part for the decline that we are seeing. But if we look at some of the sectors that are quite energy intensive, that use quite a lot of energy, like the mining sector, see a slight increase there. So let's talk about the factors that actually contributed to this decline.
Well, certainly the decline in economic activity is due to the load shedding. That's one of the primary causes of the actual decline in the economic activity. Perhaps some of the other sectors, there is still potential for growth, and this is why I believe that South Africa is a great country. South Africa is the largest mineral resource country in the world. So certainly that is a serious positive as far as we are concerned, and we need to exploit that, and certainly that is not being done. Perhaps some of these figures are now reflecting that there's some light there, and we need to really fight those kind of issues that affect these kind of industries. So one of the critical things I think in our country is that we're unable to attract foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment is there to, in fact, to grow this economy. That is what we need to do. We are not growing this economy. And what kind of foreign direct investment am I referring to? The kind of foreign direct investment we're looking for is where foreign capital comes into this country. They invest in the bricks and mortar. In other words, they build factories, they employ thousands of people, they transfer skills, they promote small and medium enterprises by dealing with them. And all of these good things are definitely not happening in our country. So we need to attract that foreign direct investment. Not the kind of foreign direct investment which we also see that arrives in our stock market. And perhaps it arrives today, and 3 or 4 weeks later, there's some emerging market crisis globally, and that money exits our country within days. That's not the kind of foreign direct investment. We want that foreign direct investment that will grow this economy, and that's what we should be doing.
So we've had the economic envoys that have been going on roadshows across the world to try and attract the foreign direct investment that you referred to. We've had various other interventions by way of conferences here in South Africa, and pledges have been made. So are we seeing a return? Are those monies and those pledges actually materializing?
No, unfortunately not, because a lot of these are talk shows. And perhaps people come and look and want to pledge, but once when they see the country and the kind of challenges the country is facing, whether it's crime, whether it's corruption, whether it's just having proper skills, the skills mix perhaps is not the right one in our country. So these are the negatives that are affecting these pledges that have been made. So the money is not really flowing, it's just a pledge.
But how do we turn that around? Because I've always wondered about this, and it's a bit of a conundrum whereby if our own corporates are not investing in South Africa, surely that is not a vote of confidence in our own country, in our own economy. Why should foreign direct investment then flow into South Africa under those circumstances?
Well, certainly it's up to the South Africans to actually attract the foreign direct investment, and that is normally done through creating some kind of incentives to the foreign capital. So in other words, creating tax holidays, and this has worked well in many other countries around the globe. The Pacific Rim countries in the 70s actually did that. What they did was that if you actually brought in capital, you invested in the factories, you transferred the skills, you got a tax holiday maybe for 3 or 5 years. Now that's the kind of encouragement that we need at a very high level. That should not preclude our local investors who are already in our economy to even take advantage of these tax holidays. So really, in order to stimulate this economy, we need to create incentives, we need to create subsidies, we need to create tax holidays in a big way so that we can get this economy going.
But why aren't we doing it? Because if I was reading something earlier this morning about what's happening in the United Arab Emirates, where they are creating conditions whereby foreign investors can actually wholly own certain entities in that country outright. So they obviously awake to some of the challenges that are being faced and creating environments that are conducive for foreign direct investment to flow in. What is it that we are not getting in South Africa?
Well, certainly in South Africa, I think we come from a historical past of apartheid, and perhaps we are still very conservative in our thinking. We really believe that if we make this a liberal economy, then perhaps we will be taken over once again and we will have no control over the economy. So I think to a large extent it's our government to blame. They are not taking the positive steps, and one needs to do that, because really internationally, as you've indicated, the Middle East countries seem to be streaks ahead, and they're doing these kind of things. So our lessons should be learned from these kind of countries who are doing these kind of things, and we really need to move on.
But it's also important to compare apples with apples. Are some of our government's concerns in this regard valid?
Well, they are, but certainly, we're very much afraid about the fact that we came from this historical past, and we need to address the issues. So the socio-economic challenges that the Mandela-led government identified in 1994, which is really poverty, inequality and unemployment, we are busy trying to fix those. So we're spending a lot of our time focusing on those kind of things. But perhaps the most important thing is to try and grow this economy so that will repair all these other challenges that we are facing. And I think that's something that we're not doing. The economy should do that. Take, for instance, the small and medium enterprises in this country. I certainly believe that these enterprises are not being promoted in our country, because, the kind of incentives that these kind of businesses are receiving from government is like literally zero. These are the kind of entities that are facing challenges, whether it's the actual capital that they want to run their businesses, whether it's the cost of the capital, in other words, the interest that they pay. The labor laws are certainly not conducive or friendly towards these small and medium enterprises. So there's a whole lot of challenge. The education mix in our country doesn't encourage entrepreneurship. That's something that needs to be done at universities and tertiary institutions, where every student that enters that university must do a course in entrepreneurship. Now, I can't understand why that is not happening in our country.
But these are causes that a government routinely champions. So when we talk about them as things that are not happening, that are actually hampering economic growth in this country, again, where is the disjuncture?
Well, certainly, I think that government is not playing a very active role. Government is perhaps playing this passive role. And if you look at the budget that was presented last week, there wasn't enough to stimulate this economy. One of the major challenges that we face is to grow the revenue of this country. And how do we grow the revenue? First way is to actually grow the economy. So if you grow the economy, there are more people participating in the economy, the government will end up with more money. Certainly we're not seeing that, because I believe the small and medium enterprise is not being promoted. I really believe foreign direct investment is not being promoted. We speak about entrepreneurship, that is not being promoted. The other way of actually doing it is to broaden the tax base. Now, we are achieving that to some extent, and we know for a fact we are now starting to tax expats, in other words, South African residents who are earning money offshore. That's a way of broadening the the actual taxpayer base. What about the digital economy? You and I buy things internationally, but are these companies being taxed? I'm sure they are not being taxed. So that's another way. The cannabis industry has now been regulated. Now it's important that we get behind this industry and we make sure that they pay tax. We must, the minister did announce that charitable organizations are not paying taxes for the business activities that they are conducting. So broadening the tax base is important. Taxing people more is also important. Now, perhaps that the minister missed the opportunity. Many people thought it was a great thing that they didn't increase VAT and the fact that they didn't tax even more. But
are we not overtaxed?
Well, certainly we are a fairly heavy taxing nation. I mean, if you take, for example, wealthy people, there are about 750,000 taxpayers that foot the bill, roughly about 75% of the tax, personal income tax in this country, and there are about 400 companies, largest companies, that pay 60% of the tax bill. Certainly we are being overtaxed. So if you take a wealthy person who earns more than 1.5 million rands a year, he's paying 45% tax. He's paying, when he sells an asset, he's paying capital gains tax at the highest rate of 18%. Then he's also paying VAT. He's paying estate duty when he dies. He's paying indirect taxes. So yes, we are a fairly heavy taxing nation. And let's be real, the tax morality issue, it certainly hurts these people, because what they are saying is that I'm paying so much of tax in this country. What am I getting in return for the tax that I'm paying? I have to send my children to a private school, and I do that with after-tax money. If I want to go, if I need medical attention, again, I have to use private medical aid or private hospitals, and I'm doing that with literally after-tax money. So, and if I can't even get a decent pension in this country. So those are the kind of tax morality questions that are being asked. In many other countries, these are being provided for at a high tax rate. So again, we need to revisit our expenditure side. There are two sides of an economy. There's a revenue side and there's an expenditure or the spending side. And I really believe we're not looking at the spending side. I mean, we spend in this country, we have a serious problem. Most of our spending takes place in the form of consumption expenditure instead of actually building infrastructure. In other words, building schools, building roads, building universities, building hospitals. And these in turn, if they are productively applied, they will generate more income for us. But we're not doing that. We're spending on the public sector wage bill, we're spending roughly 35% of the total expenditure is spent in that particular area. We're spending a lot of money in the state-owned entities. And we need to ask ourselves, should government be involved in a state-owned entity? Strategically, perhaps yes. If it's a strategic enterprise, then the government needs to play some kind of role. Should the government play a role in the management and the operations itself? Categorically, no. Should the government be the sole shareholder? Categorically, no. If you take a simple example like South African Airways, does the government need to continue pouring taxpayers' money into South African Airways year in and year out? What for? If you really think about it, South African Airways is more a badge for us. It does bring in international tourism, but there are many other airlines that can do that. So South African Airways needs to be privatized. But perhaps a soft approach is for government to continue to hold 51%, but sell 49%. Now, if you sell 49% to a private equity enterprise, perhaps an international airline, there are many international airlines that will buy into SAA, will change the routes. But then what would happen? They would employ technocrats. So they don't employ people who understand the industry, who understand the business. These are highly technical businesses. I don't believe we have the skills, neither do the politicians have the skills to run these businesses. So they get involved in the operations, and the management, they appoint as directors. They should not be doing that. So what would then ultimately happen is that we'll be able to sell a state asset. That will increase our coffer, that will increase our revenue, our government coffers. It'll do good for our country. That certainly solves one problem, and that we could get 50, 100 billion just by selling SAA 49% of its stake. What will also happen is that the private equity partner will get involved in the management and the operations. They'll employ the technocrats. They in turn will change these enterprises into profit making, and not for government to be pouring taxpayers' money into these enterprises. They will be able to declare dividends, and those dividends can be used by government in promoting its own socio-economic challenges of housing. If you take housing, health, all of those areas that need money, it could also use that money to promote certain parts of the economy that that are genuinely positive. Tourism, agriculture, I really believe that those economies have plenty of opportunities to grow this country, to grow this economy rather. And those are the things that we should be doing. But certainly we are not doing that.
And we're not doing it in part because of political considerations.
Well, certainly I think the politics of this country really needs to be revisited, because perhaps the kind of government that we have in this country is certainly not moving in a very positive direction, and there are a lot of negatives, and we really need a strong party to challenge the ruling party in this country.
Is that the answer, though? Is the answer a political one? When we talk about growing the South African economy, does it really matter which political party is in power?
Well, the party that is involved doesn't really matter, but perhaps they need to have a very positive attitude towards the economy, because I really believe the economy needs to be literally given a jump start, and if that happens, then your other socio-economic challenges automatically find a way to get fixed. The poverty issue, the inequality in our society, so you get a greater middle class of people, and that's what we want. We want a middle class of people who enjoy a better life, who pay more taxes, who contribute to the coffers of the country, who then, in turn, the country will then help to promote the economy, and in that way, the poor people will benefit.
It seems it's something that's easier said than done, because we talk about jumpstarting this economy. We've been talking about it for the longest time. Why aren't we able to do it? Do we actually know what to do?
That's a good question. I really believe that there are certain fundamentals that have to take place. A simple fundamental like to have a clearly defined economic policy. I don't believe we actually have that in this country. We need a clearly defined economic policy that both local investors and foreign investors understand.
Let's just unpack that, because we often hear this clarion call for policy certainty in South Africa. What does that mean in simple, practical terms? What would that look like?
Well, it simply means that we want to encourage investment in our country, and we will do everything possible to make sure that we can encourage people to invest in our economy. So, for example, corruption is a serious problem in our country. Certainly we need to get rid of that. So we need a clear indication from government how they're going to handle corruption and what they're going to do about it. We still don't have a clear situation. We need to combat crime in this country. We don't have a clear policy. A foreign investor that would want to come into this country will want the safety factor to play quite a critical role. Will want to ensure that it is a clean economy, that it has got all these things that one needs. One doesn't want any kind of corruption. So certainly we're not getting clear mandates from government on these kind of issues to know that...
But that includes the private sector as well, because they are part and parcel of this corruption that we see. People often point out to state-owned entities. The private sector is wholly part and parcel of that problem.
Well, certainly, you need two people. You need a corruptor and a corruptee. So I really believe that we need stronger sort of, from a government perspective, for these people to be singled out and to be sent to prison. That is not happening in our country. Really believe that every time we have a commission and something happens and fingers are being pointed, no action is being taken by the judicial system. So we need to jack up the judicial system and ensure that these people are prosecuted and sent to jail. And that is certainly not happening. So those are the kind of things that we need to see. This clear policy that we talk about, the clear economic policy, has surrounding it all these other issues that also need resolution. And if these things are done, certainly we'll get a positive from it.
So we saw some of the sectors that previously contributed positively, like agriculture, transport, contributing negatively this time around. What do we need to do? What are the low-hanging fruits at this point? Where should we start?
Well, certainly the low-hanging fruit is what is our country noted for and what we can possibly, where there are huge opportunities. Certainly, I really couldn't, the agricultural sector didn't do so well because of drought. That is beyond our control. So some of these factors, certainly climate change and so on, is beyond our control. But certainly the low-hanging fruits would be agriculture, it would be tourism, it would be mining. These kind of industries need to be promoted in a big way by government. So government should do everything in their power. For example, the mining charter needs to be properly resolved, and we need to encourage not for people to leave, not existing people who are mining in our country to leave our country, but rather to attract foreign investment to come and join and really promote our mining industry. So we're really looking for that.
Professor Garach, thanks so much for stopping by this morning. And that was, of course, Professor Dilip Garach, Chartered Accountant and CEO of Garach Corporation Financial Services Group. And we're going to leave that one there. And, of course, it relates to our question of the day. So let us know what your understanding, your view is on this technical recession. It's 7 o'clock. Time for your latest.